Speaking of this sort of stupidity, last night Stephen Colbert had on Bill Clinton. Now, as you'll recall, Bill Clinton is the worst. So Bill Clinton is not only a human being who has sexually harassed half of the women in the United States, he's just as bad about women as any allegations about Trump ever have been. Bill Clinton, some of the allegations are worse. I mean, there are allegations of rape, a credible allegation of rape against him by Juanita Broderick. Well, Bill Clinton went on NBC's Today Show, and then he got mad at the interviewer yesterday. We pointed this out. He got very upset with the interviewer and started waving his bony finger at the guy and saying, "How dare you ask me these questions? I apologize to the entire American people." Well, now Stephen Colbert is asking Bill Clinton about all of this. But Stephen Colbert, remember, a guy who said that President Trump had been used by Vladimir Putin as his bleep holster, as his genital holster. You remember, he said this on national TV. I guess that Stephen Colbert's idea of a strong interview is to act as precisely that for Bill Clinton, to perform the job no one but Monica Lewinsky would perform on Bill Clinton. Apparently, that's what Stephen Colbert was doing. Look how he opens this interview. Now, later in the interview, Colbert says, you know, you're the most prominent man in my lifetime to sexually harass the help. But listen to how he opens this interview with Bill Clinton.
I noticed you didn't enjoy that entire interview. I want you to enjoy this one, but I do want to ask you something, which is when I got home last night, on the CNN, they had a lower third banner that said something about William Clinton's tone-deaf response to the question from the Today Show. My question is, would you like a do-over on that answer? Do you understand why some people thought that was a tone-deaf response to his questions about the Me Too movement and how you might reflect on your behavior 20 years ago?
Okay, why don't you just stick your hand up his ass and use his face as a meat puppet? I mean, as long as you're going to just feed him the answer, you may as well just be a full ventriloquist. Like, Stephen Colbert could have done an interview with Stephen Colbert dressed as Bill Clinton with that question. I mean, that's as bad as any leading question that was asked by anybody during the election cycle on Fox News to Donald Trump. Okay, that leading question is astonishing. The last part of that question, do you understand why some people thought that was a tone-deaf response to his question on the Me Too movement? Here's the part where he feeds him the answer. I love it. And how might you reflect on your behavior 20 years ago? And how that reflection may change based on what you've learned from the Me Too movement? Well, why don't you just give him the answer? Why bother asking the question? Would you like a do-over? Imagine that Donald Trump would come on the show right now, and Stephen Colbert, and Donald Trump just did an interview about the sexual harassment allegations, and he gotten really grumpy about it. And Stephen Colbert, you think Colbert would lead off with, you know, Mr. President, would you like a do-over? Would you like to reflect on how the Me Too movement has changed your perspective on these things over the years? Or do you think that Colbert would have said, you know, Mr. President, looks like you weren't too happy with that sexual harassment question. Maybe because you sexually harassed people. Don't you think that's what Colbert probably would have said to lead off that interview? And then, of course, here's Bill Clinton's answer, because he gets thrown a softball right over the middle of the plate, and he hits about a single. I mean, he barely clears the second baseman's head.
It wasn't my finest hour, but the important thing is that was a very painful thing that happened 20 years ago, and I apologize to my family, to Monica Lewinsky and her family, to the American people. I meant it then, I meant it now. I've had to live with the consequences every day since. And I still believe this Me Too movement is long overdue, necessary, and should be supported.
Okay, so now he believes that the Me Too movement, yeah, I love that. He comes back and he actually spouts Colbert's direct answer back at Colbert. Yes, great interviewing skills. And then you wonder why people on the right aren't willing to watch Stephen Colbert, why people on the right are looking at people like Colbert and saying, this is endemic to the media. You wonder why we don't take the media seriously? You know, President Trump, when he says fake news, I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it again. When President Trump says fake news and people resonate to that, it's not because they're just blindly following President Trump. They're doing that because they didn't like the media in the first place. They figured the media was lying to them because the media does lie to them. The media plays defense for Democrats on a regular basis, all the time. And then we are supposed to believe them when suddenly they turn on one politician in particular? At the very least, we're going to say it's disproportionate. As I said yesterday, the same media who are complaining about coverage of Hillary Clinton's health issues was spending the last week suggesting that maybe Melania Trump had been abducted and anally probed by aliens or something. These are the same people. It really is quite amazing. Okay, so in just the extent of the Obama administration's lies on Iran are pretty extraordinary. Of course, their biggest lie about the Iran deal is that the Iran deal was pursued because there was an opening in negotiations. You remember that Ben Rhodes, you remember that guy who was basically sitting there in stunned silence during the Trump election? And it was hilarious and wonderful. You remember that guy? Well, that guy spent most of the Obama administration publicly lying about Iran, saying that Iran had now moderated. There was a new Iranian regime in place that was eager to reach out to the American people and make a deal with the world. That was all a lie. He went around bragging to the New Yorker magazine that he had created an echo chamber strategy to anybody who would listen, right? That he had used people like Jeffrey Goldberg, the new editor over at The Atlantic, who I believe was a pawn and a lackey for the Obama administration. Rhodes basically suggested the same thing. Rhodes said that we were lying to everybody about what was going on with the Iran deal. They went ahead and did it anyway. And this is why so many people on the right are so fed up with the media suddenly getting harsh with President Trump. Now, listen, I wish the media were just as hard on President Obama as they've been on President Trump. I think the solution to the media's disproportionate focus on Trump is to increase its coverage of Democrats, not to decrease its coverage of Republicans. There's this feeling on the right that turnabout is fair play. If the media was going to ignore all the bad stuff that Obama did, why shouldn't we ignore all the bad stuff that Trump does? My feeling is, how about we hold all of our politicians to the same account, and when they do bad stuff, let's call them on it. But is there a media double standard? Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely, there's a media double standard when it comes to the Obama administration versus the Trump administration. And this latest spate of stories regarding Iran is the most obvious example of this. I mean, it is just stunning. It truly is stunning. Remember, Obama was lying to the American people over and over again. The word lied was never used with President Obama with regard to anything. Go back and look. The media never said that Obama lied about things. They said that maybe he made a mistake or maybe he exaggerated. I mean, even this AP report, with this really, really damning AP report, at the very beginning of the report, they try to soft pedal the nature of the report itself. It's really quite astonishing. At the very beginning of the report, here is what the AP actually says. So the report begins with these words. The Obama administration secretly sought to give Iran access, albeit briefly, to the U.S. financial system by sidestepping sanctions set in place after the 2015 nuclear deal. I love those two words, albeit briefly. Just wonderful. Albeit briefly. Can you imagine them saying that about Trump? Trump fibbed, albeit briefly. They would never use that kind of language with regard to President Trump because this is how the media treat Democrats versus how they treat Republicans. Obama gets to run around saying he had a clean administration when he absolutely did not. Now, President Trump, in the most bizarre and strangely hilarious and yet dispiriting controversy of the week, this would be President Trump's decision to disinvite the Philadelphia Eagles. So the White House has an alternative story as to why President Trump disinvited the Philadelphia Eagles. So the going story is that the Eagles weren't going to show up with enough players. Trump got mad and he canceled it. The White House story is that the Eagles were basically jacking them around, that it was a setup. Okay, I've been hearing this from a lot of conservatives. I just want to say this. Okay, if you think that President Trump is constantly being set up by people, there's a way for him to avoid the setup, and that is to just not fall for it. Yeah, I'm getting kind of tired of the constant excuse making. You know, Trump makes a mistake, and then it's, well, he was set up to make that mistake. Okay, guess what every test you ever had in school was set up to do? It was set up to test you. Yes, it's true. President Obama's political opponents, President Trump's political opponents, rather, test him on a regular basis. The question is how well you handle those tests. So I'm not saying the Philadelphia Eagles are pro-Trump. They're not. The owner, Jeffrey Luria, is a wildly left guy. But President Trump could have handled this better, no question. But here is Sarah Huckabee Sanders suggesting that the Eagles were planning a political stunt. Now, I will explain in a second what exactly the White House should have done about it.
Look, if this wasn't a political stunt by the Eagles franchise, then they wouldn't have planned to attend the event and then backed out at the last minute. And if it wasn't a political stunt, then they wouldn't have attempted to reschedule the visit when they knew that the president was going to be overseas. And if this wasn't a political stunt, they wouldn't have waited until Monday, well after 1,000 of their fans had traveled and taken time out of their schedules to offer only a tiny handful of representatives to attend the event.
Okay, so apparently, the idea here is that they had originally said they were going to bring 100 people, and then they said they were only going to bring like 10 people, and then at the very end it was only like Nick Folk, who is the quarterback for the team. Fine. So Trump should have hosted Nick Folk. He should, on behalf of your team, and the media would have made fun of it, and then he should have said, listen, I understand if people don't want to visit the White House, that's their prerogative. Again, there was a member of the Boston Bruins back in 2012 who didn't visit the White House. The media ripped him up and down. I mean, speaking of media bias, the media ripped that player up and down. Tim Thomas, who was the goalie for the Boston Bruins, they said, how dare he not visit the White House? It just demonstrates what a bad faith guy he is. Now the entire Eagles team doesn't really want to visit, and the media's like, fine. But how should the White House have handled it? What they should have done is they should have said, listen, the White House is always open to any of these players who want to visit. And if they don't want to visit, you know, that's really them missing out because the White House is an amazing place, and we would really love to see them here. But we can have our political differences. I just wish they didn't extend to the sporting world. Right? Being gracious is not the end of the world. And listen, again, I understand. President Trump is a hammer in search of a nail, and he's constantly hammering, and he's constantly kicking back. I get it. I get that's his tendency. I don't think he is well served in this particular case. So here is how Trump responded. So President Trump responded by saying, you know what? We won't have the Eagles. We'll cancel the Eagles, but we'll have a patriotic event, a deeply patriotic event, at which we'll get the Marine Corps band out here to play God Bless America. And I will talk about how much we respect our flag. The problem I have with this, of course, is that a lot of the Eagles aren't showing up because they don't like Trump personally and don't like his politics, not necessarily because of the kneeling for the national anthem controversy at all. Trump, as I said yesterday, lied when he said that Philadelphia Eagles members were kneeling for the anthem. Not one Philadelphia Eagles member kneeled the entire year for the national anthem. But here was President Trump yesterday doing his event, saying that he respects the flag. The suggestion, of course, being that his political opponents do not respect the flag. I don't like this. If you want to say Colin Kaepernick doesn't respect the flag, agree. If you want to say that every member of the Eagles who didn't show up doesn't respect the flag, I don't think President Trump is the flag. I don't think that this administration is the flag. I hated when President Obama did the same thing, that if you disagreed with him, you were disagreeing with America. I hate that crap. It's just nonsense. Here was President Trump doing it yesterday with respect to the flag.
We love our country. We respect our flag. And we always proudly stand for the national anthem. We always will stand for the national anthem.
So about 1,000 people showed up. A lot of these people were White House staffers and White House interns. There were some Philadelphia Eagles fans who showed up as well. But the fact that Trump felt the need to do this kind of thumb in the eye. Listen, I understand a lot of people who are Trump supporters like this sort of thing. They like that he's fighting the culture war. I think it's divisive. I think that it's useless. I think it's counterproductive. And then, of course, it leads to awkward moments like this. So, if the idea was to avoid an awkward moment, such as Trump's there just with the quarterback of the Super Bowl winning team, then you could avoid then you shouldn't have awkward moments like this where Trump is standing there and he's got the Marine Corps choir standing next to him, flanking him and singing God Bless America, and then it appears he doesn't know the words. Okay, is it like a big deal that he doesn't know the words? No, we had the same controversy when he visited a football game, and it was college football national championship, and he supposedly didn't know the words to the Star Spangled Banner and all the rest of it. Is it a big deal? No, it's not a big deal. It's just, I don't like this kind of showmanship. This is not what the presidency is for. It is not an imperial office. It is not a place where you summon people to meet you, and they are required to meet you. It is not a place where if you don't come to meet the president, then he gets to bring out the Marine Corps band and imply you're not a patriot. I find this sort of stuff distasteful, and you should put the shoe on the other foot if you disagree. If you think it would have been good if Hillary Clinton did you like it when President Obama shined the rainbow flag on the White House? I thought that was utterly obnoxious. I thought the idea that you're using the people's house to push your own personal politics, right? You're suggesting that all of America endorses your view of same-sex marriage. It was gross. It was counterproductive, and it increased the cultural divides. That's why President Trump was elected, because of those cultural divides. Well, by the same token, even if I agree with President Trump's message about patriotism, I don't like the use of patriotism as a club to wield against political enemies, particularly when I don't agree with the idea that everyone who refuses to visit the White House is unpatriotic. Maybe they just don't like President Trump. Just as Tim Thomas was a patriot, maybe he just didn't like President Obama. All of these things are quite possible. Now, with that said, do I think that it's foolish that all of these athletes keep saying they're not going to visit the White House? I do think it's foolish. I understand that, listen, they have their prerogative. That's fine. They don't have to. I would like to hear their specific beefs with President Trump as their excuse for doing this. But now President Trump has basically gotten into a culture war he thinks he can win. Both sides think they're winning this culture war. In the end, only the American people lose. So President Trump thinks that he's winning when he's fighting the NFL and the NBA, because in one sense he is. Most people agree with him about kneeling for the national anthem. Most people agree with him about patriotism being a part of our sporting heritage. Most people agree with all of that stuff. And so he thinks he's winning. On the other side, people on the left think they're winning because they think whenever they get in a culture war with President Trump, what they are doing is winning people over to their side because President Trump is personally unpopular. So in just a second, I'm going to show you how the NBA and the NFL, how all these people are responding to President Trump in an attempt to win more leftist fans. I'll explain that in just a second.